The sound of glass shattering against wooden floorboards echoed through Theodore Nolan's general store, and for a moment, Teresa felt her entire world collapse with it. The ceramic jar she had been holding, filled with her carefully saved coins, now lay in pieces at her feet, the meager contents scattered across the dusty planks like broken dreams. She dropped to her knees immediately, her fingers trembling as she tried to gather the coins before they rolled into the cracks between the boards. Her face burned with humiliation as other customers turned to stare, their conversations dying away into uncomfortable silence. "Miss, please," Theodore Nolan said, his voice dripping with false sympathy as he moved around the counter with surprising speed for a man of his considerable girth. "You have made quite the mess in my establishment." Teresa's hands shook as she counted the coins in her palm. $3.47. That was all that stood between her younger brother recovering from pneumonia and losing him forever. Dr. Whitman had been clear that the medicine would cost $5, and without it, 12-year-old Samuel had maybe a week left. She had spent the last month scrubbing floors, taking in laundry, and doing any odd job she could find in Goldfield, Nevada, this dusty mining town that had sprung up like a wild flower in the harsh desert landscape. It was October of 1903, and the gold rush had brought prosperity to many, but precious little had trickled down to a 19-year-old woman trying to keep her family together after both parents had died in a mining accident 8 months prior. "Mr. Nolan," she said, trying to keep her voice steady as she stood, her worn calico dress dusting against her ankles. "I have $3.47. I know the medicine costs $5, but Samuel is getting worse. Could we possibly arrange some kind of payment plan? I can work off the difference. I can clean your store, organize your inventory, anything you need." Theodore Nolan's eyes, small and calculating beneath heavy brows, swept over her with an expression that made her skin crawl. He was a man in his mid-40s, balding and thick around the middle, with a reputation for driving hard bargains. He had arrived in Goldfield 2 years ago and quickly established himself as one of the primary suppliers of goods in the rapidly growing town. His store sat on the main street, a prime location that allowed him to charge whatever prices he deemed appropriate, knowing that desperate people would pay. "Payment plans," he said slowly, drawing out the words as he rubbed his chin. "That is a considerable request, Miss Norton. You see, I am a businessman. I have suppliers to pay, overhead costs to consider. The medicine you require was expensive to procure. It came all the way from San Francisco." "I understand that, sir," Teresa said, hating the pleading tone that had crept into her voice. "But I am willing to work. I am a hard worker, and I give you my word that I will pay back every cent." Nolan walked slowly around her, his boots clicking against the floor with each deliberate step. Teresa felt the eyes of the other customers still upon her, watching this negotiation play out like some kind of theatrical performance. She recognized a few faces from town, including Mrs. Henderson, who quickly looked away when Teresa's eyes met hers. "The problem, Miss Norton," Nolan said, stopping in front of her again, "is that I have heard such promises before. Many people in this town have grand intentions, but circumstances often prevent them from following through. I cannot run a charitable organization." "It would not be charity," Teresa insisted, her voice rising slightly with desperation. "I would work for it. I would earn it." Nolan's lips curled into something that might have been a smile but held no warmth. "Actually, I believe I have a solution that might work for both of us. You see, I have been looking for someone to help manage my household. My wife passed 2 years ago, and I find that I require assistance with domestic matters. If you were to agree to work as my housekeeper for, say, 6 months, I could provide you with the medicine immediately." Something in his tone made alarm bells ring in Teresa's mind. 6 months seemed excessive for a debt of $1.53, even accounting for interest. But Samuel's face flashed before her eyes, his skin pale and clammy, his breathing labored. Time was a luxury she did not possess. 6 months seems quite long for such a small debt, she said carefully. "Ah, but you must consider," Nolan said, moving back behind his counter and pulling out a ledger, "that providing the medicine on credit involves risk on my part. There is also the matter of your previous purchases." He flipped through pages with theatrical slowness. "Yes, here we are. Over the past 8 months, you have accumulated a tab of $12.37 for various supplies: flour, beans, lamp oil, and so forth. I have been patient, understanding your difficult circumstances, but surely you cannot expect me to extend further credit without some assurance of repayment. Teresa felt her blood run cold. $12? But I thought I had paid most of that off. I brought you $3 just last month. Which I applied to your account naturally, Nolan said smoothly. However, interest accumulates. Miss Norton, these are standard business practices. Interest? Teresa's voice came out strangled. You never mentioned interest when I bought those supplies. You said I could pay when I was able. And I maintain that position, Nolan said, closing the ledger with a decisive thump. You may pay when you are able. However, if you choose to work for me for 6 months, I will consider all debts paid in full and provide the medicine your brother needs immediately. If not, well, I am afraid I cannot extend any further credit, and I will need to begin pursuing collection of the existing debt. Teresa stared at him, understanding dawning like a sick sunrise. He had been tracking her purchases, adding mysterious interest charges, creating a debt she had not known existed. And now, with Samuel's life hanging in the balance, he was using that manufactured debt as leverage. The worst part was that she had no proof, no written agreements. Everything had been done on a handshake and his verbal assurances. This is not right, she said, her voice shaking with anger now rather than fear. You are taking advantage of my situation. I am offering you an opportunity, Nolan corrected, his voice hardening. One that I suggest you consider carefully. Your brother's condition is deteriorating, is it not? Every hour counts. The cruelty of his words, delivered with such casual indifference, made Teresa's stomach turn. She opened her mouth to respond, to argue, to scream at the injustice of it all, but what good would it do? She had no legal recourse, no powerful friends to advocate on her behalf. She was a poor, orphaned young woman in a rough mining town, where might and money made right. I need time to think, she managed to say. Of course, Nolan said, his voice returning to that oily, false sympathy. Take all the time you need, though I would not wait too long if I were you. Teresa bent to retrieve the last few coins that had rolled near the door, her vision blurring with tears of rage and helplessness. As she straightened, the door swung open with enough force to make the bell above it ring violently. A tall figure stepped through, silhouetted against the bright desert sunlight that streamed in behind him. Sorry, a deep voice said. Did not mean to make such an entrance. As Teresa's eyes adjusted, she took in the newcomer. He was a cowboy. That much was immediately clear from his attire. Dusty leather chaps over denim trousers, a worn but well-cared-for brown leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head to reveal sun-bronzed features and startlingly clear blue eyes. He looked to be in his mid-20s with several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw and the kind of lean, muscled build that came from hard physical labor. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it, though his hand was nowhere near the weapon. Can I help you? Nolan asked, his tone notably different than it had been when speaking to Teresa, more respectful, more cautious. Hope so, the cowboy said, his gaze sweeping over the scene before him. Those blue eyes lingered on Teresa for a moment, taking in her tear-stained face and the coins clutched in her hand before moving to Nolan. Name is Blake Barrett. I am new to Goldfield, looking to stock up on some supplies, trail rations mostly, coffee, beans, salt pork if you have it. Of course, Nolan said, his businessman's smile returning. I have everything you need. Miss Norton was just leaving. Blake's eyes returned to Teresa, and she saw something in them, a question, perhaps, or recognition of her distress. But she could not stay here any longer, could not bear to be in this store another moment with Nolan's predatory gaze upon her, and the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. Excuse me, she murmured, moving toward the door. Blake stepped aside to let her pass, and as she brushed by him, she heard him say quietly, Madam. Just that one word, but it was spoken with a gentleness and respect that made her throat tighten further. She hurried out into the October afternoon, the Nevada desert heat still formidable despite the season. Goldfield's main street bustled with the usual activity, miners heading to and from the diggings, freight wagons rumbling past loaded with equipment or ore, women with parasols hurrying between shops. The town had grown exponentially in the past year as word of rich gold strikes spread. What had been a small camp was now a proper town, with wooden buildings replacing canvas tents, and big mining companies moving in alongside the individual prospectors. Teresa walked quickly, not wanting anyone to see her tears. She made it 3 blocks before she had to stop, ducking into the narrow alley between the assayer's office and a boarding house. She leaned against the sun-warmed wood and let herself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of utter despair. How had everything gone so wrong? Her parents had been good, hard-working people. Her father had been careful in the mines, always following safety protocols. But a timber support had failed, and he and 6 other men had been buried under tons of rock and earth. The mining company had paid for a funeral and given her mother $50 for a man's life. Her mother had tried to keep the family together, taking in sewing and laundry, but the stress and grief had taken their toll. She had simply faded away over 3 months, dying in her sleep one night the previous March. The doctor said it was her heart, but Teresa knew better. Her mother had died of a broken heart and exhaustion. That had left Teresa, at 18, responsible for Samuel. She had done everything she could, but it had not been enough. When Samuel caught a cold 3 weeks ago, she had hoped it would pass. But it had settled into his lungs, and Dr. Whitman had diagnosed pneumonia. The medicine existed that could save him, but it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her. "Miss!" Teresa's head snapped up. Blake Barrett stood at the entrance to the alley, his expression concerned. She hastily wiped at her face, mortified that this stranger should see her in such a state. "I am fine," she said automatically. "Forgive me for saying so, but you do not appear fine," Blake said, his voice gentle. He took a few steps into the alley, but maintained a respectful distance. "I do not mean to intrude, but I could not help overhearing some of what was said in the store. Nolan is trying to cheat you." Teresa let out a bitter laugh. "Yes, well, knowing it and being able to do anything about it are 2 different things." Blake was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just blue, but flecked with gray, like storm clouds over the desert. There was a steadiness to his gaze, a calm competence that she found oddly comforting. "Your brother is sick?" he asked. She should not be talking to a strange man in an alley. It was improper, could damage her reputation further, in a town where reputation was often all a woman had. But something about Blake made her feel safe, and she was so tired of carrying this burden alone. "Pneumonia," she said. "He needs medicine, but I do not have enough money, and Nolan is using that against me, claiming I owe him more than I do, demanding I work for him for 6 months to clear the debt. But the way he looked at me, I do not think housekeeping is all he has in mind." Anger flashed across Blake's face, quick and fierce. "That low-down snake. How much do you need?" $5 for the medicine, but Nolan says I owe him over $12 for past purchases that I thought I had already paid for. He claims there was interest, but he never told me that when I bought the goods." Blake reached for his pocket, and Teresa immediately held up her hand. "No," she said firmly. "I appreciate the thought truly, but I cannot accept charity from a stranger." "It would not be charity," Blake said. "Call it a loan." "I have no way to pay you back," Teresa said, her voice breaking. "That is the whole problem. I work as hard as I can, but there are not enough hours in the day to earn what I need. Every job in this town pays men 3 times what they pay women for the same work, and most respectable jobs are not available to me anyway." Blake was quiet again, that thoughtful look on his face. Then he said, "What if I bought the medicine from Nolan, and then you could pay me back in some way that does not involve working in his house?" "How?" Teresa asked helplessly. "I am new to Goldfield," Blake said. "Came here to try my hand at prospecting, but I do not know the area well. I could use someone familiar with the town and the territory. Could use someone to cook and maintain a camp too. I can prospect and pan for gold, but my cooking is terrible. You work for me, helping with the camp and such, until the debt is paid. Fair wages, respectful treatment, and you would not have to be alone with me if that concerns you. We could set up camp near town, so you could go back to your brother every day." Teresa stared at him. "You would do that? For a stranger?" "My mother raised me to believe that when you see someone in need and you have the means to help, you do it," Blake said simply. "Besides, I genuinely could use the help. Prospecting is hard work, and it would be good to have hot meals and an organized camp." It was too good to be true. Men did not just help women out of the goodness of their hearts. not in Teresa's experience. There had to be a catch, some ulterior motive. As if reading her thoughts, Blake said, "I am not looking for anything improper, Miss Norton. I am simply offering an honest job for honest pay. You help me prospect and maintain a camp. I help you get your brother the medicine he needs. We both benefit." Teresa wanted to believe him. More than that, she needed to believe him, because the alternative was going back to Nolan, and that path filled her with dread. "How do I know you are telling the truth?" she asked. "I suppose you do not," Blake admitted, "except that I am willing to get the medicine right now, before you have done a lick of work for me. That is faith on my part too, is it not? Faith that you will keep your word." He had a point. And Samuel needed that medicine today, not tomorrow or next week. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. Blake looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I had a younger sister once. She got sick, and we did not have money for medicine. She died. I was only 15, too young to do anything about it, but I swore that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would. So here I am, keeping that promise." The raw honesty in his voice convinced Teresa in a way that smooth words never could. This was a man who had known loss, who understood what it meant to watch someone you loved slip away for want of money. "All right," she said, "but I want to be clear about the terms. I work for you as a camp cook and helper, nothing more. I maintain my own sleeping arrangements, and I can leave if at any time you make me uncomfortable." "Agreed," Blake said immediately. "And you will receive $2 a week in wages, plus the cost of the medicine paid up front. Does that seem fair?" $2 a week was actually generous for the type of work he was describing, more than she made from all her various odd jobs combined. At that rate, she could pay back the $5 for the medicine in 3 weeks and still have money left over for other necessities. "More than fair," she said. Blake extended his hand. "Then we have an agreement." Teresa hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was firm but careful, the calluses on his palm speaking to years of hard work. The handshake felt like a promise, like hope. "Let us go get that medicine," Blake said. They walked back to Nolan's store together, and Teresa felt the curious eyes of townspeople tracking their progress. She would have to deal with gossip, but right now, she did not care. Samuel needed medicine, and she was finally going to be able to provide it. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. Nolan looked up from behind the counter where he was weighing out flour for another customer, and his expression darkened when he saw Teresa had returned with Blake. "Miss Norton," he said coldly, "have you reconsidered my offer?" "Actually," Blake said, stepping forward, "I am here to purchase the medicine she needs. $5, you said?" Nolan's eyes narrowed. "The medicine is $5, yes, but Miss Norton has an existing debt with my establishment that would need to be addressed." "Her debt is her business," Blake said. "I am a new customer purchasing medicine. Surely you are not refusing to sell to me." It was beautifully done. By positioning himself as the buyer rather than Teresa, Blake had neatly sidestepped Nolan's attempted manipulation. Nolan's face flushed an unattractive shade of red. "Of course not," he said stiffly. "Though I must say, it is interesting how Miss Norton found a benefactor so quickly. Makes one wonder about the nature of such arrangements." Blake's hand did not move toward his gun, but something in his posture changed, became more dangerous. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underlying it. "I would be careful about making implications regarding a lady's character, Nolan. In my experience, men who do so usually have poor character themselves." The store had gone silent again. The other customer, a grizzled prospector, watched the exchange with interest. Nolan seemed to realize he was on dangerous ground. "No implications intended," he said quickly. "The medicine is $5. Blake counted out 5 silver dollars and placed them on the counter. "And I would like to review Miss Norton's account if you do not mind. Seems only proper to understand the situation fully." "That is a private matter between myself and Miss Norton," Nolan protested. "Miss Norton?" Blake looked at Teresa. "Do you give me permission to review your account?" "Yes," Teresa said immediately. Nolan hesitated, then reluctantly pulled out his ledger, turning it so Blake could see. Blake studied the entries carefully, his finger tracing down the columns. "Interesting," he said after a moment. "According to this, Miss Norton made purchases totaling $8.70 over the past 8 months. She paid $3 against that debt last month, leaving a balance of $5.70. Yet you claim she owes over $12. Would you care to explain the discrepancy? Interest and handling fees, Nolan said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Handling fees? Blake's eyebrow rose. For what exactly? And I do not see any mention of interest rates in these entries. In fact, I do not see any documentation of the terms of credit at all. In most places, charging undisclosed interest is considered fraud. Nolan's flush deepened. This is a mining town, not San Francisco. We do things differently here. Different is one thing, Blake said. Illegal is another. Now, I am not a lawyer, but I have been around enough to know that what you are doing is not right. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to cross out that false debt in your ledger. You are going to give Miss Norton the medicine, and you are going to forget any claim you think you have against her. And if I refuse? Nolan asked, but there was no real defiance in his voice anymore. Blake leaned forward slightly. Then I start telling everyone in Goldfield exactly how you do business. This town may be rough, but most folks still have a sense of honor. They do not take kindly to men who prey on orphan girls and sick children. Your business would dry up pretty quickly, I reckon. It was a bluff, perhaps, but it worked. Nolan snatched up a pen and drew heavy lines through the entries in his ledger. There, he said. The account is cleared. Now take your medicine and get out of my store. Blake took the small bottle of medicine from Nolan's hand and passed it to Teresa. The glass felt cool and heavy in her palm, weighted with the promise of Samuel's recovery. Thank you, she said to Blake, her voice thick with emotion. Let us get this to your brother, Blake replied. They left the store, and Teresa felt like she could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. The medicine was in her hand, Samuel would recover, and she had escaped Nolan's trap. That was incredible, she said as they walked. How did you know what to do? Blake shrugged. I have seen men like Nolan before. They count on people being too scared or too desperate to fight back. But they fold pretty quickly when someone stands up to them. Where does your brother live? We have a small cabin at the edge of town, near the Chinese Quarter, Teresa said. It is not much, but it is home. They walked through Goldfield's dusty streets, past saloons already loud with afternoon drinkers, past the stamp mills that processed ore with their constant rhythmic pounding, past rows of tents and hastily constructed buildings that housed the flood of fortune seekers still arriving weekly. The town had a raw, unfinished quality, as if it could not quite decide whether to become a real city or blow away in the desert wind. Teresa's cabin was indeed small. Just 2 rooms with thin wooden walls and a roof that leaked when it rained, which thankfully was not often in this parched landscape. She pushed open the door and was immediately hit by the sound of Samuel's labored breathing. He lay on a narrow bed in the corner, his small frame barely making a dent in the mattress. His face was flushed with fever, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. A woman in her 30s sat beside him, dabbing at his face with a damp cloth. She looked up in surprise when Teresa entered. Teresa, thank goodness you are back. He has been asking for you. Thank you so much for staying with him, Mrs. Chen, Teresa said. Mrs. Chen was their neighbor, a Chinese immigrant who ran a small laundry business with her husband. She had been helping watch Samuel when Teresa had to work, refusing payment despite Teresa's insistence. Of course, Mrs. Chen said. She glanced at Blake with curiosity but did not ask questions. I have the medicine, Teresa said, holding up the bottle. Mrs. Chen's face broke into a relieved smile. Oh, that is wonderful news. The doctor said 2 spoonfuls immediately, then 1 spoonful every 6 hours. Teresa carefully measured out the medicine, then gently lifted Samuel's head. Samuel, wake up. You need to take this. Samuel's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy with fever, but focused on her face. Riza? He mumbled, using his childhood nickname for her. I am here, she said softly. I need you to swallow this medicine. It is going to make you better. Samuel obediently swallowed the medicine, made a face at the bitter taste, then fell back against the pillow. Tastes bad, he complained weakly. The best medicine always does, Teresa said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. You rest now. Samuel's eyes drifted closed again. Mrs. Chen stood, gathering her things. I should return home, she said. My husband will wonder where I am, but I will check on you later this evening. Mrs. Chen, I cannot thank you enough, Teresa said. The older woman smiled. We help each other. That is what neighbors do. She nodded politely to Blake and left. Teresa stood watching Samuel breathe for a long moment, relief washing over her in waves. He was going to be all right. The medicine would work. It had to. He will recover, Blake said quietly from the doorway. I can see he has a fighter's spirit. He does, Teresa agreed. He has been so brave through all of this. She turned to face Blake properly. Now that the immediate crisis was over, reality was setting in. She had entered into an employment arrangement with a man she had met less than an hour ago. She knew nothing about him except that he had helped her when she desperately needed it. So, she said, when do you want me to start working? Not today, Blake said. Today you stay with your brother. Make sure the medicine is helping. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start setting up a proper camp. You are not worried I will run off with the medicine and not hold up my end of the bargain? Teresa asked. Blake's lips quirked in a small smile. No, I'm not worried about that. You strike me as someone who keeps her promises. I am, Teresa said. I will work hard for you, I promise. I believe you, Blake said. Now, I am going to head back to town and get those supplies I originally came for. I am camped about a half-mile west of town right now, just a bedroll and my horse. Tomorrow we can scout for a better location and start setting up properly. Does that sound all right? Yes, Teresa said. I will meet you at your camp tomorrow morning. Where exactly? Blake gave her directions, then tipped his hat. Until tomorrow then, Miss Norton. Teresa, she said, if we are going to be working together, you should call me Teresa. All right, Teresa. And you should call me Blake. After he left, Teresa sat beside Samuel's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Already, his breathing seemed a little easier, though that might have been her imagination. She took his small hand in hers, feeling the fever heat of his skin. We are going to be all right, she whispered. I found someone who helped us. Someone good, I think. I hope. The afternoon wore into evening, and Teresa watched Samuel carefully for any change. Dr. Whitman stopped by just after sunset, making his evening rounds. I see you obtained the medicine, he said, checking Samuel's breathing and pulse. Dr. Whitman was an older gentleman with white hair and kind eyes. He had been willing to wait for payment, unlike Nolan. Yes, sir, Teresa said. Good, good, the doctor said. He should show improvement by tomorrow. The fever should break within 2 days. Continue the medicine as directed. Make sure he drinks plenty of water and keep him comfortable. He is a strong boy. He will pull through. After the doctor left, Teresa made thin broth from the last of her supplies and managed to get Samuel to take a few spoonfuls. Then she sat beside him as night fell over Goldfield, the sounds of the town filtering through their thin walls, piano music from the saloons, laughter, occasional shouts. She thought about Blake Barrett and wondered if she had made the right decision. But what choice had she had, really? It was either trust him or put herself in Nolan's power, and her instincts told her Blake was the better risk. She must have dozed off in the chair, because she woke with a start to find gray dawn light filtering through the cabin's one small window. Samuel was sleeping peacefully, and when she touched his forehead, she nearly cried with relief. His fever had broken. The medicine was working. Mrs. Chen arrived shortly after sunrise to sit with Samuel, insisting that Teresa keep her appointment with Blake. He needs rest more than anything now, Mrs. Chen said. I will make sure he takes his medicine and drinks water. You go do what you need to do. Teresa changed into her sturdiest dress, a brown cotton that had seen better days but was practical for work. She braided her dark hair tightly and covered it with a bonnet to protect against the sun. Then she made the walk out to Blake's camp. She found him already up, feeding his horse a handsome bay gelding with a white blaze down its face. Blake had a small fire going and coffee brewing in a battered pot. He looked up when she approached and smiled. Morning. How is your brother? Better, Teresa said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. His fever broke during the night. That is wonderful news, Blake said, and he sounded genuinely pleased. Coffee? Please. He poured her a cup in a tin mug, and she accepted it gratefully. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. So, Blake said, I have been thinking about where to set up a proper camp. There is a spot about 2 miles northeast of here, near a creek that still has some water flowing. It is close enough to town that you could check on Samuel daily, but far enough out that we would have some privacy and space to work. What do you think? That sounds good, Teresa said. I know the area. The water is clean there. They spent the morning moving Blake's meager possessions to the new location. The spot he had chosen was indeed ideal, a slight rise that would keep them above any flash flooding, with scrub brush and a few hardy cottonwoods providing some shade. The creek was small but steady, fed by underground springs that survived even the desert heat. Blake had more supplies than she had initially thought. In addition to his bedroll and horse, he had a pack mule loaded with prospecting equipment pans, a pickaxe, shovels, and even a small sluice box for processing gravel from the creek. He also had a tent, cooking equipment, and enough food supplies to last several weeks. "I have been saving for this for 3 years," Blake explained as they unloaded the mule. "Been working as a ranch hand down in Arizona, putting away every spare dollar. Finally had enough to outfit myself properly and take a real shot at prospecting." "Is it what you always wanted to do?" Teresa asked as she helped him set up the tent. It was a large canvas affair, big enough to stand up in, with room for sleeping, storage, and a small stove for cold nights. "Not really," Blake admitted. "I grew up on a small farm in Kansas. That is what I know, what I'm good at. But after my parents died and my sister died, there was nothing keeping me there. So I drifted west, took whatever work I could find. But I always had this idea that maybe I could find gold, make enough money to buy my own land again. Start over properly." There was a wistfulness in his voice that Teresa understood. The desire to belong somewhere, to have something of your own, she felt that deeply. "What about you?" Blake asked. "What did you want to do before everything happened with your parents?" "I wanted to be a teacher," Teresa said. "I finished school, top of my class. I was good at it, loved helping the younger children learn. But teacher positions go to men, usually, or to women with family connections. I had neither." They worked in companionable silence for a while, setting up camp. Blake was organized and efficient, clearly experienced at this kind of work. By midday, they had a proper campsite established, tents secured, fire pit dug and lined with stones, supplies organized and covered against the elements. "You should head back to check on Samuel," Blake said. "I will start prospecting this afternoon, get a feel for the creek." "What do you want me to cook for dinner?" Teresa asked. "Whatever you think is good," Blake said. "I will leave that to your expertise. I will have the fire ready for you when you come back." Teresa made the walk back to town, checking on Samuel and finding him even better than he had been that morning. He was awake and asking for food, which Dr. Whitman said was an excellent sign. She made him a proper meal, made sure he took his medicine, and then returned to camp with the supplies she would need for cooking. Blake was at the creek when she returned, standing knee-deep in the water with his pan, swirling gravel and water in the methodical pattern of an experienced prospector. Teresa set about making dinner, using the supplies Blake had brought. She made biscuits in a Dutch oven, fried salt pork, and made gravy to go over everything. It was simple, but it was hearty and hot. When Blake smelled the food cooking, he came back to camp with his pan. He was wet to the waist and looked tired but content. "Any luck?" Teresa asked. "A few flakes," Blake said, showing her the pan. At the bottom, amid black sand, were several tiny specks of gold. "Not enough to get rich, but it is a good sign. The gold is here, just have to find where it is concentrating." They ate dinner as the sun set, turning the Nevada sky into layers of orange, pink, and purple. The desert heat broke with the darkness, and the temperature became pleasant. Blake had set up a second tent, smaller than the main one, on the other side of the camp. "That is yours," he said, nodding toward it. "Private sleeping quarters, as agreed." "Thank you," Teresa said. "I appreciate you keeping your word." "I always keep my word," Blake said seriously. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Teresa would wake before dawn, get the fire started, and make breakfast. Then she would walk to town to check on Samuel, who was recovering rapidly thanks to the medicine. She would return to camp by mid-morning and spend the day cooking, maintaining the camp, and sometimes helping Blake process gravel from the creek. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together and talk. Teresa found herself looking forward to those evening conversations. Blake was intelligent and well-read, surprising her with his knowledge of literature and history. He had educated himself during long nights on the ranch, reading whatever books he could get his hands on. They discussed everything from Shakespeare to politics, to their opinions on the rapid industrialization sweeping across America. "Do you think it is progress?" Teresa asked one evening, about a week into their arrangement. "All these machines, all this rush to modernize?" "I think it is inevitable," Blake said, "but I'm not sure it is always good." We gain efficiency but lose something too. Community maybe. Connection to the land. I see it here in Goldfield. The big mining companies move in with their industrial equipment, and suddenly the individual prospector cannot compete. It is becoming a world where only the rich get richer. That is a grim view, Teresa said. Maybe, Blake allowed, but I have seen too much of it to be optimistic. The railroads, the banks, the mining companies, they are all run by men who never get their hands dirty, but get rich off the labor of those who do. Teresa thought of her father, buried under tons of rock while trying to make a living for his family. My father believed in honest work. He thought if you worked hard enough, you would get ahead. Your father was a good man, I am sure, Blake said gently, but the system is rigged. Hard work is not always enough. It was a sobering conversation, but Teresa appreciated Blake's honesty. He did not try to sugarcoat reality or feed her empty platitudes. By the end of the second week, Samuel was well enough to leave the cabin. Teresa brought him to camp one afternoon, wanting him to meet Blake. Samuel was shy at first, hiding behind Teresa's skirts, but Blake won him over by showing him how to pan for gold. See, you swirl it like this, Blake demonstrated, his big hands patient with the pan. The gold is heavier than the other material, so it sinks to the bottom. You wash away everything else until only the gold remains. Samuel tried it himself, tongue poking out in concentration, and let out a delighted laugh when Blake showed him the tiny specks of gold at the bottom of his pan. I found gold, Samuel crowed. You certainly did, Blake said, ruffling the boy's hair. You are a natural prospector. Watching them together made something warm unfold in Teresa's chest. Blake was good with children, patient and kind. It reminded her of what she had lost when her father died, that sense of safety and protection that came from having a good man in your life. As October wore into November, Blake's prospecting began paying off in small but steady amounts. He had found a spot in the creek where gold was concentrating, not enough for a major strike, but enough to provide a modest income. He made trips into town to sell his gold dust to the assayer, always bringing back supplies and insisting on buying treats for Samuel peppermints or licorice that made the boy's eyes light up. Teresa continued working as Blake's camp cook and helper, and the arrangement suited them both well. She was earning enough money to not only pay back the cost of Samuel's medicine, but also to save a little. For the first time since her parents died, she felt like she had some stability, some hope for the future. What she had not expected was the way her feelings for Blake began to change. It happened gradually, like the slow warming of the desert air after a cold night. She found herself noticing things about him, the way he smiled when he was pleased with his work, the gentle tone he used when speaking to Samuel, the strength of his hands, and the grace of his movements. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed and the serious, thoughtful expression he wore when listening to her talk. She told herself it was just gratitude, appreciation for his help. But gratitude did not explain the flutter in her stomach when their hands accidentally touched while washing dishes, or the way she caught herself watching him work, admiring the play of muscles under his shirt. It was dangerous, these feelings. Blake had been nothing but honorable, treating her with respect and keeping appropriate boundaries. She could not risk their working arrangement by developing romantic feelings for him. Besides, what could she offer a man like Blake? She was poor, responsible for a young brother, with no prospects beyond day-to-day survival. Blake was working toward his dream of owning land, of building something substantial. He could do better than a desperate woman with nothing to offer but problems. But the heart, Teresa was learning, did not listen to logic. One evening in late November, after Samuel had gone to sleep in Teresa's tent, he had started staying at the camp more and more, loving the adventure of it. Teresa and Blake sat by the fire. The night was cool, and Blake had draped a blanket around her shoulders without asking, just noticing she was cold and doing something about it. Teresa, Blake said, his voice serious. I want to talk to you about something. Her heart jumped. Was he going to tell her their arrangement was ending? That he no longer needed her help? All right, she said carefully. Blake poked at the fire with a stick, not looking at her. I have been thinking about my plans, about what I want to do with the gold I have been finding. Yes? I have enough saved now to make a down payment on land, Blake said. There is a property about 10 miles from here. A small ranch with a decent house, a barn, and enough acreage to run cattle and maybe grow some crops. The owner is looking to sell because he wants to try his luck in the Klondike gold fields up in Alaska. That sounds wonderful, Teresa said, genuinely happy for him, even as her heart sank. If Blake bought land, he would not need a camp cook anymore. Their arrangement would end. The thing is, Blake continued, finally looking at her, a ranch is a lot of work, too much for one person. It would be easier with a partner, with a family. Teresa's mouth went dry. Blake, what are you saying? Blake set down the stick he had been using and turned to face her fully. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making his expression hard to read. I am saying that over these past weeks I have come to care for you a great deal, Blake said. You are smart and hard-working and kind. You have faced terrible hardship, but it has not made you bitter or mean. You take care of your brother with such devotion. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better. Teresa's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. Blake, let me finish, Blake said gently. I know this might seem sudden, and I know our arrangement started as a business matter, but somewhere along the way, it became more than that for me. I wake up looking forward to seeing you. I find myself working faster so I can get back to camp and talk to you. When something good happens, you are the first person I want to tell. And when I think about the future, about that ranch, I cannot imagine it without you there. Teresa could hardly breathe. Are you saying you have feelings for me? I am saying I have fallen in love with you. Blake said, his voice steady and sure. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you braid Samuel's hair in the morning and make sure his hands are clean before meals. I love how you hum while you cook and the way you argue with me about politics. I love that you are not afraid to challenge my ideas or call me out when I'm being stubborn. I love everything about you. Tears were streaming down Teresa's face. I love you too, she whispered. I have been trying so hard not to, because I thought it would ruin everything. But I love you, Blake. I love your honor and your gentleness. I love how you treat Samuel like he matters. I love your laugh and your mind and your hands. I love you. Blake reached across the space between them and cupped her face with his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Then marry me, he said. Be my wife. Let me be a husband to you and a father figure to Samuel. Let us build that ranch together, make a real home, a family. Yes, Teresa said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. Blake kissed her then, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as years of loneliness and longing poured into that connection. Teresa had been kissed before, awkward attempts by boys in school, but this was nothing like those fumbling experiences. This was two souls recognizing each other, claiming each other, promising each other everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. I will spend every day trying to make you happy, he promised. You already do, Teresa said, just by being you. They stayed up late that night, talking about the future with an excitement and hope that neither had felt in a long time. Blake explained his plans for the ranch in detail, the repairs the house needed, his ideas for starting a small herd, the garden Teresa could plant. They talked about Samuel, about making sure he got a good education and had the opportunities they never had. They talked about maybe having children of their own someday, adding to their family. What do you think Samuel will say? Blake asked at one point. He already loves you, Teresa said. He asks about you constantly when we are in town. He will be thrilled. She was right. When they told Samuel the next morning, the boy let out a whoop of joy and threw himself at Blake, hugging him around the waist. Does this mean you will be my brother now? Samuel asked, looking up at Blake with shining eyes. Something like that, Blake said, gently correcting him. I will be your brother-in-law, which means I will be part of the family. I will look after you and your sister, and you will help us on the ranch. How does that sound? It sounds perfect, Samuel said. They were married 3 weeks later, in December of 1903, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Goldfield. Mrs. Chen and her husband attended, along with Dr. Whitman and a few other friendly faces from town. Teresa wore a new dress that Blake had insisted on buying for her, a beautiful blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Blake wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. Samuel stood beside them as Blake's best man, beaming with pride throughout the ceremony. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Theodore Nolan, who had been lurking in the back of the church, stood up. I object, he said loudly. This woman owes me a debt. Blake turned slowly to face Nolan, his expression dangerous. The debt was settled. You crossed it out of your ledger yourself. Under duress, Nolan said. You threatened me. I told you the truth about your business practices, Blake said calmly. That is not a threat, it is a fact. Now sit down or leave. This is a house of God, and you are disrupting a holy ceremony. The minister, an elderly man with a stern expression, fixed Nolan with a glare. Mr. Nolan, I suggest you leave. I have heard about your business dealings, and I do not appreciate you bringing them into my church. Nolan looked around, seeing no support from the other attendees. With a huff, he turned and stormed out. Blake squeezed Teresa's hand reassuringly, and the ceremony continued. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and told Blake he could kiss his bride, Blake pulled Teresa close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had an audience. Samuel made a gagging sound that made everyone laugh, breaking the tension Nolan had created. After the ceremony, Mrs. Chin hosted a small reception at her home, serving Chinese food that Samuel declared was the best thing he had ever eaten. It was not a fancy affair, but it was filled with warmth and genuine joy. Teresa felt like she was floating, like any moment she would wake up and find this was all a dream. But it was not a dream. Blake was real, solid, and warm beside her. His ring was on her finger, a simple gold band that he had made himself from gold he had panned from the creek. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. That night, they consummated their marriage in the main tent at their camp, with Samuel sleeping in Teresa's old tent on the other side of the campfire. Blake was gentle and patient, making sure Teresa's first time was filled with pleasure rather than pain. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, bringing her to heights of sensation she had never imagined possible. And when he finally entered her, joining them completely, Teresa felt a sense of rightness that went beyond the physical. This was where she belonged, with this man, building this life. I love you, Blake whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward, sweaty and satisfied. I love you too, Teresa said, tracing patterns on his chest with her finger. I cannot believe this is real, that I get to be with you. Believe it, Blake said. You are stuck with me now. Teresa laughed. That does not sound so bad. In January of 1904, they moved to the ranch. The property was everything Blake had described: a sturdy house with 3 bedrooms, a barn that needed some repairs but was structurally sound, and 200 acres of land that included grazing pasture, a reliable well, and even a small orchard of fruit trees. The previous owner, a man named Morrison, was eager to head north to the Klondike and gave them a fair price. Blake paid half up front and arranged payments for the remainder, confident that he could continue prospecting part-time to supplement their income while building up the ranch. Those first months on the ranch were hard work, but deeply satisfying. Blake repaired the barn and built new corrals for the cattle they planned to buy. Teresa cleaned and fixed up the house, making curtains and planting a garden. Samuel, who had thrived with regular meals and care, helped with everything from hauling water to feeding the chickens they had acquired. They purchased 6 head of cattle to start their herd and a milk cow for fresh dairy. Blake also bought breeding stock, a bull, and several heifers, investing in the future. It was a risk, putting so much of their savings into livestock, but Blake was confident the investment would pay off. In 3 years, we will have a herd of 30 or more, he explained to Teresa as they watched their cattle graze one evening. We can sell beef to the miners in Goldfield. Fresh meat is always in demand in a mining town. Teresa leaned against his side, his arm coming around her naturally. You have really thought this through. I have had 3 years to plan, Blake said. Every night on the ranch in Arizona, I would lie awake and imagine this. What I would do if I got the chance. Now I have it, and I have you. I am the luckiest man alive. As spring arrived in 1904, the ranch began to bloom. Teresa's garden flourished in the rich soil, providing them with fresh vegetables. The cattle fattened on the spring grass. Samuel, now 13, was growing tall and strong, learning ranching skills from Blake with enthusiasm. In April, Teresa realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses for 2 months and had been feeling sick in the mornings. When she told Blake, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. A baby, he kept saying. We are going to have a baby. Samuel was equally excited when they told him, already making plans to teach the baby everything he knew. Teresa was nervous. Childbirth was dangerous, and she had lost her own mother. but Blake's steady presence and Dr. Whitman's care helped ease her fears. "You are young and strong," Dr. Whitman assured her during an examination. "Everything looks normal. I see no reason why you should not have a healthy pregnancy and delivery." As Teresa's belly grew through the summer and fall of 1904, Blake became even more protective and attentive. He insisted she rest frequently, took over her heavier chores, and constantly made sure she was eating enough. It was both endearing and occasionally frustrating when he would not let her do things she was perfectly capable of doing. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know," Blake said, "but humor me. I cannot lose you." The raw fear in his voice made Teresa soften. She remembered what he had told her about his sister, about feeling helpless as she died. He was terrified of losing Teresa the same way. "You will not lose me," she promised, taking his hand and placing it on her swollen belly. "Feel that? Our baby is strong and healthy, and so am I." Blake's face softened as he felt the baby kick against his palm. A fighter, just like the mother. Their son was born in December of 1904, during a cold snap that had Blake pacing anxiously while Dr. Whitman attended Teresa. The labor was long, nearly 18 hours, but ultimately uncomplicated. When Blake finally heard his son's first cry, he burst into the bedroom, despite Dr. Whitman's protests about propriety. Teresa, exhausted but radiant, held their baby against her chest. "Come meet your son," she said. Blake approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red-faced infant. "He is perfect," he breathed. "He needs a name," Teresa said. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Blake said, Benjamin Barrett, after my father." "Benjamin," Teresa repeated, testing the name. "I love it." Little Benjamin was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly established himself as the center of the household. Samuel was a devoted older brother, helping with everything from changing diapers to walking the floor with the baby when he was fussy. Blake was completely besotted, spending every spare moment holding his son, talking to him, showing him the ranch he would one day inherit. "Look at the cattle, Ben," Blake would say, holding the baby up so he could see. "Someday, all of this will be yours. You are going to be a rancher just like your old man." Teresa would watch them with a full heart, hardly able to believe this was her life now. Just 2 years ago, she had been desperate and alone, watching her brother die while a predatory trader tried to exploit her. Now she had a husband who loved her, a thriving ranch, 2 healthy boys, and more happiness than she had ever imagined possible. The ranch continued to prosper through 1905 and 1906. Blake's prediction about the cattle herd proved accurate by the spring of 1906. They had 32 head of cattle and were selling beef regularly to Goldfields restaurants and boarding houses. Teresa's garden had expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes, and she had started selling preserves and baked goods in town, adding to their income. Samuel, now 15, was practically a full partner in the ranch operations. He had a gift with animals and was particularly good at training horses. Blake had started buying young horses cheap, letting Samuel train them, and then selling them for a profit. It was turning into a lucrative side business. One evening in July of 1906, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Blake said, "I have been thinking about expanding." "Expanding how?" Teresa asked, nursing 18-month-old Benjamin. "Morrison's old property, the land north of ours, is for sale again. The people who bought it from Morrison could not make a go of it. I spoke to the bank today. If we can come up with half the purchase price, they will loan us the rest." "How much land are we talking about?" Teresa asked. "Another 300 acres, Blake said. "It would nearly triple our property. We could run a much larger herd, maybe even start breeding horses seriously, instead of just as a side business." Teresa considered it carefully. They had been doing well, but taking on debt was always a risk. "Can we afford it?" "I think so," Blake said. "We have been saving steadily, and with the income from the cattle and horses and your preserves, we can handle the loan payments. But I would not do it without your agreement. We are partners in this." Teresa loved that about Blake. He never made major decisions without consulting her, treating her as an equal, despite the era's conventions about husbands being the sole decision-makers. "I think we should do it," she said. "We came here with nothing and built all of this. Why stop now?" Blake grinned and leaned over to kiss her, careful not to disturb Benjamin. "I love you." They purchased the additional land in August of 1906, and Blake immediately set about fencing it and preparing it for cattle. It was exhausting work, but they threw themselves into it with enthusiasm. Samuel worked from dawn to dusk alongside Blake, and Teresa managed the household and the garden while caring for Benjamin. In the fall of 1907, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter, Anna, was born in May of 1908, a tiny, delicate baby, with Blake's blue eyes and Teresa's dark hair. She was named after Blake's mother, another connection to the family he had lost. With 2 young children and an expanding ranch, life was busier than ever, but it was good, filled with purpose and love. Samuel, now 17, had started courting a young woman from town, the daughter of a shopkeeper. Blake had given his blessing, impressed by the young woman's intelligence and work ethic. "He is growing up," Teresa said one night, as she and Blake prepared for bed. Anna was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, and Benjamin was in his own small bed in the adjacent room. "He is," Blake agreed, pulling her into his arms. "Soon he will be getting married himself, starting his own family." "Do you think he will stay on the ranch?" Teresa asked. "I hope so," Blake said. "There is enough land now for all of us, for him to have his own section to work. But if he wants to go his own way, I will support that too. We will make sure he has the education and resources to choose his own path." It was exactly what Teresa would have expected him to say. Blake had strong opinions about giving children opportunities, probably because he and his sister had been denied them. By 1910, the Barrett Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the area. They had over 100 head of cattle, a thriving horse breeding program, and had even started raising sheep for wool. Samuel had married his sweetheart, a woman named Lucy, and they lived in a house Blake had built on the northern section of the property. Samuel and Lucy had a baby on the way, which made Blake and Teresa feel wonderfully old at ages 33 and 26 respectively. Benjamin, now 5, was an energetic boy who followed Blake everywhere, already showing interest in ranching. Anna, at 2, was a sweet-natured toddler who loved animals and could often be found in the barn, playing with the barn cats or feeding chickens. Teresa sometimes thought about how different her life could have been if Blake had not walked into Nolan's store that day, if he had not stood up to the trader, if he had not offered her an alternative. She would probably have been trapped in Nolan's house, subjected to who knows what kind of abuse. Samuel might have died. She certainly would not have this beautiful life, this family, this home. "What are you thinking about?" Blake asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel and Lucy were visiting for Sunday dinner, and Lucy's pregnant belly was prominent now. "How lucky I am," Teresa said simply. "We both are," Blake said, taking her hand. "I came to Nevada looking for gold, and I found something far more valuable. I found you." "That is terribly romantic," Teresa teased, but her eyes were wet with emotion. "I mean it," Blake said seriously. "All the gold in the world would not mean anything without you and our family. You are my treasure, Teresa. You always will be." They kissed as the sun set over their land, over everything they had built together. In the yard, Benjamin shrieked with laughter as Samuel chased him, and Anna clapped her hands in delight. Inside the house, dinner was waiting, the table set for family. It had been 7 years since that desperate day in Nolan's store, 7 years since Blake had walked through that door and changed Teresa's life forever. They had faced challenges, droughts that tested the ranch, illness that swept through the cattle, hard winters and scorching summers. But they had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. As spring turned to summer in 1910, the ranch continued to thrive. Samuel and Lucy's baby was born in June, a healthy boy they named Thomas. Blake was delighted to be a grandfather at 33, though he claimed he was too young for the title. "Grandpa Blake," Samuel teased him, "has a nice ring to it." "You are lucky I like you," Blake grumbled good-naturedly. Teresa loved watching Blake with his grandson, seeing the same gentleness and patience he had shown with Benjamin and Anna. He was a natural with children, probably because he remembered so clearly what it was like to be a child without stability or security. In the fall of 1910, something unexpected happened. Theodore Nolan showed up at their ranch. Blake answered the door, and his expression turned hard when he saw who it was. "Nolan, what do you want?" "I came to speak with Mrs. Barrett," Nolan said. His voice was different than Teresa remembered, less confident, more subdued. Teresa came to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. She felt Blake's protective presence behind her, solid and reassuring. "What do you want to speak to me about?" she asked coldly. Nolan looked uncomfortable, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you 7 years ago. It was wrong. I have been thinking about it a lot lately, especially since I became sick." Teresa noticed then how much older Nolan looked, how his skin had a grayish tinge. "You are ill?" "Cancer," Nolan said bluntly. "The doctor says I have maybe 6 months. It has given me time to think about my life, about the things I have done. I was not a good man, Mrs. Barrett. I took advantage of people when they were desperate. I justified it as business, but it was cruelty, pure and simple." Teresa did not know what to say. Part of her wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him his apology was too little, too late. But another part of her, the part that had been shaped by Blake's kindness and integrity, felt something like pity. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," Nolan said. "I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, that I realize what I did was wrong. You do not have to forgive me. I do not deserve it. But I needed to say it." He turned to leave, but Teresa found herself saying, "Mr. Nolan." He stopped, looking back. "I forgive you," Teresa said. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. "What you did was wrong, and it could have destroyed my life, but it did not. Because of what happened, I met Blake. I have the life I have now because of that day. So, in a strange way, your cruelty led to my happiness." Nolan's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "That is more than I deserve." After he left, Blake pulled Teresa into his arms. "You are a better person than I am. I am not sure I could have forgiven him." "I almost did not," Teresa admitted, "but holding on to anger at a dying man seemed pointless. Besides, he was right. He does not deserve my forgiveness, but I deserve the peace that comes from giving it." Blake kissed her forehead. "You are remarkable." "I learned from the best," Teresa said, smiling up at him. Nolan died 4 months later, in January of 1911. Teresa attended his funeral, one of only a handful of people there. She laid a flower on his grave and said a prayer for his soul, then walked away without looking back. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Benjamin started school in Goldfield, riding into town each day on his pony. Anna would start the following year. Samuel and Lucy had 2 more children, daughters they named Rose and Emma. The ranch house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family when the grandchildren visited. In 1913, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise given that she was 30 years old and had thought she was done having babies. Blake was thrilled, though worried about her health. "Women have babies at 30 all the time," Teresa assured him. "I will be fine." Their son Matthew was born in early 1914, a calm, peaceful baby who rarely cried. Benjamin, now 9, was fascinated by his baby brother, while Anna, at 6, appointed herself his protector. By 1915, the ranch was a true family enterprise. Samuel managed the cattle operation, Blake focused on horse breeding, and Teresa had expanded her preserves business into a small commercial operation, selling to stores throughout the region. They had built a separate building for her kitchen work, with modern equipment and proper storage. They were prosperous in a way that seemed impossible when Teresa thought back to that desperate 19-year-old girl counting coins on a store floor. They had money saved, property that was worth a fortune as Goldfield continued to grow, and most importantly, they had each other. One evening in the summer of 1915, Blake and Teresa sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Benjamin was teaching Matthew to walk, holding the 1-year-old's hands as he took wobbly steps. Anna was reading aloud to them, practicing for school. In the distance, they could see Samuel and Lucy's house, smoke rising from the chimney as Lucy prepared dinner. "What are you thinking about?" Blake asked, echoing a question he had asked many times over the years. "That I could not have imagined this," Teresa said. 12 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought Samuel would die, and I would end up trapped and miserable. I could not have imagined any of this." "But you fought for it," Blake said. "You did not give up, even when things seemed impossible. That is why you have it now." "We have it," Teresa corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. Partners, Blake said, raising her hand to kiss it. Partners, Teresa agreed. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Teresa reflected on the unexpected journey her life had taken. A cruel trader's attempt to exploit her desperation had led her to the love of her life. A cowboy's sense of justice had given her a future, and her own resilience and strength had helped her build something lasting. She thought about the generations to come. Benjamin and Anna and Matthew would grow up secure and loved, would have opportunities she and Blake never had. Samuel's children would inherit the ranch, would carry on the legacy. The life she and Blake had built together would endure long after they were gone. I love you, she said to Blake, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them by a campfire 12 years ago. I love you too, Blake said, more than I can say. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children, watching the sunset, content in the knowledge that they had created something beautiful from desperate beginnings. The ranch spread out around them, hundreds of acres of Nevada land, tamed and made productive through hard work and determination. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing, horses whinnying in the corrals, the sounds of a working ranch at day's end. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life built on love and justice and second chances. Theodore Nolan had tried to rob Teresa of her future that day in his store, exploiting her desperate need for money to trap her. But Blake Barrett had made sure justice was done. He had stood up to a bully, offered an alternative, and in doing so, had found his own future. Together, they had built something neither could have achieved alone: a ranch, a family, a love that would endure for the rest of their lives. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Nevada sky, Blake and Teresa called their children inside for dinner. The house was warm and filled with light and laughter, a sharp contrast to the cold, uncertain world outside. But inside these walls, there was security and love, built on a foundation of one cowboy's integrity and one woman's courage. They gathered around the table, Blake at one end and Teresa at the other, their children between them. Blake said grace, thanking God for their blessings, for their family, for the food on their table and the roof over their heads. As Teresa looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, she added her own silent prayer of gratitude. Thank you for that desperate day, she thought. Thank you for bringing Blake into my life. Thank you for this beautiful, unexpected journey. And as they began to eat, passing dishes and sharing stories of their day, Teresa knew that her gratitude would last forever. This was what she had fought for, what Blake had helped her achieve. This was their happily ever after, earned through trials and sealed with love. The cowboy had made sure justice was done, and in doing so, had given them both everything they had ever wanted.